people aren't considering the second and third order effects of the system.
Yeah,
They're only considering
where
at
I would
first.
disagree with you is I don't believe the NIH has been quick at all to grapple with this
I didn't say they
problem.
were quick. I just said
And
they're starting.
they're being very bureaucratic about it. They're supporting the old way of doing things and throwing crumbs to those of us who say, hey, you need to have common data elements. You need to have data sharing plans. You need to have those kinds of things, and you need to enforce them. And the fact of the matter is, they do all that, but then they don't enforce what they say they're going to do.
Welcome to Science of Leadership, the podcast dedicated to helping you become a better leader. Here, you'll gain valuable knowledge, hear inspiring stories, and learn the scientific principles that promote exceptional leadership. I'm Tom Collins, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this journey to becoming a better leader. Today, I'm honored to be joined by General Pete Chiarelli. He's a distinguished military graduate of Seattle University, holds 3 master's degrees, was commander of Multinational Corps Iraq, and served as the 32nd Chief of Staff of the Army, overseeing approximately 350,000 personnel. He was awarded multiple medals, including the Defense Distinguished Service Medal with 3 Oak Leaf Clusters and a Bronze Star. Following his retirement from the Army, he has served as the CEO of One Mind, an organization that seeks to transform the world's mental health. General Chiarelli, welcome to Science of Leadership, and thanks for being here, and also thanks for your service to our nation.
Well, thank you, sir. Great to be here.
When we last spoke, one of the 3 key lessons for leadership that you talked about was the necessity to consider second and third order effects when we're considering decisions. As I actually went through the transcripts and interviews of the 51 4-stars that I spoke with, over 60% of them really hit on this idea of needing to understand the second and third order effects that could happen. And so for our listeners who aren't familiar with this term, can you boil it down very simply? What do you mean about understanding the second and third order effects?
Well, for every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. I don't believe that's necessarily a leadership dictum, but it's one that is true in this case. And quite frankly, when I was Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, commanding the division or corps, when people had a problem, normally they would try to fix it themselves. And the most precious thing a leader has when trying to make a decision is time, the ability to understand the problem and the best solution for it. But normally, when you ascend in the ranks, staff uses a majority of the time and only brings the problems to you that they can't fix themselves. And when that happens, I would find more often than not, there would be 2 or 3 courses of action that I could take. I'd have very limited time to make a decision. Basically, the staff had coalesced around one of those courses of action, and it looked on the surface like it solved the problem. However, what you would find out is that if you made the decision based on that recommendation, there were other impacts that you had not had enough time to totally understand, other balls that would begin rolling because of the decision you made to solve that particular problem. And that's the second and third order effects of what happens. I can give you a great example from commanding downrange in Iraq. During the time I was there from the 2004 to 2007 timeframe, we extended units downrange at various times. They were sent over on 12-month deployments, and there were times that we had to go ahead and extend their rotation to 16 months. Mm-hmm. In going ahead and extending those, it seemed like a pretty clear-cut decision to go ahead and extend them additional 4 months. But too often we did not understand what the second and third order effects of that was going to be. One of the effects was that folks at home had made plans to welcome their loved one, and many of them were getting ready to go on vacation. They had made plans to take the kids to Disneyland or wherever. Sure. And what seemed to be a very clear-cut decision to go ahead and extend an additional 4 months, there were many, many impacts that occurred. Mm-hmm. And it's not to say that the decision to extend was the wrong decision. It's just that you need to understand what all the second and third order effects are going to be before you make a decision like that, so that you can mitigate those second and third order effects and do everything you possibly can to help people deal with the new reality of spending an additional 4 months downrange.
Yeah, that's a great example. And one of the things you touched on early just then was this concept of time and having time to think about it and what's going on. And in my discussion with the 4-stars and thinking about this concept, I developed this image, a figure, if you will, a graph that I have in my book. And it's conceptual. It's not obviously based on scientific data that proves it. But essentially, the more if you look on the y-axis and then look on the x-axis, right? If consideration of second, third order effects are on the y-axis and time is on the x-axis, there's an upward trend, right? The more time that you spend considering the second and third order effects, the better your decision making will be up to a point. And that is where the point that I would call diminishing returns, where people get locked into this analysis paralysis, and then you see that curve really turn down. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, the key is to work second and third order effects as you're getting ready to make the recommendation of how to solve the problem. To understand what the second and third order effects are, don't ignore them. That's what most people do. They ignore the second and third order effects until after the decision is made, and then they get hit with them. Had they gone ahead and factored those into their original decision making and really thought through the process, okay, so that they presented the recommended course of action and also listed what they believe the second and third order effects were going to be of that decision, how it was going to affect other things, then you can get ahead of the curve. I am in no way saying that the 80% solution that is in fact executed violently and quickly is better than waiting till you get to 100%. But remember, and what I said when I opened up my explanation, the fact of the matter is the staff had a lot of time to work through that issue. And then they brought it to me, and I had very little time. Most of those came to me and said, "Sir, here's the problem, and you have 24 hours to make a decision on how to fix it."
Sure, right.
You know?
And
they've been working it for weeks or months.
Right. The issue there, and General Gus Perna talked about this, is it's only the wicked problems that come to you, because those other problems have been solved. By the time a problem gets to you, a lot of time has elapsed and a decision needs to be made, but it's a really, really hard decision to make. And so I think that's an important caveat. Yes, indeed.
And you don't have to be vice chief of staff of the Army to have this problem. You can be a second lieutenant and have the same issue before a platoon sergeant brings a problem to you. I mean, this is constant in all leadership positions. Sure. What's really sad is sometimes we never address the second and third order effects. We get so wed to a decision and where we're going. I happen to think that medical research is a perfect example of where we have never really totally understood the second and third order effects about the ecosystem that we set up to reward researchers. And it has huge effects on us solving the problem.
I want to get to that in a minute, but just before doing that, because that's really an important topic, and it's close. I mean, because I do, medical research, and so that's very important to me, and I've been wanting to talk to you about this since our last conversation. But before that, I wanted to ask you about this notion, because it fits hand in glove with what we're talking about, I think, of the pre-mortem. It's a relatively new idea to me. I think I've only known about it maybe a year and a half after reading a book that included it. But basically the idea is put yourself in your mind in time after you've made the decision, after you've enacted something. Imagine it's failed. Why did it fail? List out the reasons that it failed, the possible threats that would lead to that. And that will give you the things that you can, as you were saying, mitigate on the front end so that you can try to prevent that. And this is in another part of the book, I talk about this idea of pre-mortem, and then they describe another graph. Being a scientist, I'm into graphs because I think they help people to see things and interpret them in an easier way. Basically, if the impact is going to be low, then don't worry about it. If the impact is going to be high, do everything you can to prevent it. If it's somewhere in the mid-range, do what you can to mitigate it, kind of concept. Anyway, so that's the pre-mortem. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. But.
No, I mean, that makes perfect sense. That's, in fact, what I'm talking about. And what I tried to do is train my staff when I went into a new position where I had individuals who were going to be bringing these kind of issues to me to do just exactly that kind of analysis. Don't just focus on solving the immediate problem. Your solution for the immediate problem, what additional issues is that going to cause? And present those to me. Don't just say, "Hey, I found the perfect solution to the problem, and boss, if you do this, everything will be just fine." That, to me, is ignoring the second and third order effects of decisions we make.
Hey, I'm breaking into the podcast conversation here to share with you an exciting announcement. If you've been following the Science of Leadership podcast for a while, you've heard me talk about the book I've been working on. Well, I'm delighted to share that after over 3 years of work, my book, The 4 Stars of Leadership, is finally available. I'm so proud of this book and what it represents. I'm certain that you're going to find it immensely interesting and helpful as a guide on your journey to becoming a better leader. Seriously, you don't want to miss this book. I'm including a link to the book in the description. I hope you'll order your copy today. And please share it with others who might be interested. Also, please be sure to share your thoughts about the book with me. Now, let's get back to this interesting conversation on the science of leadership. Now, let's turn our attention toward this topic that you brought up, the idea of medical research and the ecosystem is the word you used, that has been established with regard to that, and how that there are certain substantive second and third order effects that have never been considered, it seems.
I mean, when you have an ecosystem and a reward system that is based on individuals who do individual research, collect data, and in order to make that original research, don't share that data or those data sets, what you end up with is, particularly in this day and age, you end up with a system that doesn't take advantage of the whole. It only takes advantage of a part. And that to me is the huge problem in medicine today, is the lack of team science, of sharing. And the reason why people have a rough time sharing is because medicine is still stuck to this idea that we publish our results in peer-reviewed journals. And if we peer review that which is published and make sure that it goes through some kind of a vetting process, that it's going to be correct. And what we found out over time is that's not the case. We go back and we try to replicate many of the studies that have been done and find out that we can't replicate them because people haven't shared their data. They don't have common data sets. We don't have a journal of, I was wrong. Researchers do everything they can to cover up failure. They don't do what we did in the Army when we went to the National Training Center or any place else and did any big operation, was do an after-action review. And we spent 5 minutes talking about the things we did right, and we spend the next hour and 55 minutes talking about how we could improve the next time we did that. Well, those concepts, I think, are really, really important for a learning organization. And medical research is not that way. And in fact, people get jobs based on being first author, last author, not buried in the middle. Okay?
Yeah.
When you see team science and you see how it can work when people are willing to share data and data sets, particularly in this day and age. So here we have a system of research that says that it is data-driven, when in reality, it's myopically data-driven. It's driven on the data that the researcher collects, not the greater amount of data that is out there on that similar topic to either prove or disprove the findings of that research. And I think it has really crippled us in our ability to get at really, really tough problems. Somebody explained to me one time, they said, the heart is basically a simple mechanical instrument. Electricity, hydraulics, we understand how the heart works. Now let's go up to the brain. Let's go up to the brain to try to understand things like Alzheimer's. Let's go up to the brain and understand things like dementia, traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress. How do we get at those very, very difficult problems? And I would submit to you, we do not have a medical research ecosystem that is prepared to get at that. Now, there are a few people who have tried to change that. I always point out a guy named Dr. Jeff Manley at University of UCSF in San Francisco, who's put together about 30 different institutions that have worked on the problem of traumatic brain injury and come up with a blood biomarker that allows us to tell almost immediately after a concussive event whether or not somebody has been concussed and to the extent that they've been concussed, and whether or not it should be followed up with an MRI. And Manley believes in team science. But the system isn't set up that way. It doesn't reward those people.
And having been in it, I can say, my experience and observation is that you're correct in that people are rewarded for, historically they have been. The NIH is trying to change that and is encouraging multi-center and team science and those sorts of things. And no longer is there a single principal investigator on a lot of grants. Often you will have co-principal investigators, but historically, absolutely, that's been the case. And there's a degree of ossification that has occurred that is hard to break up. And the promotion and tenure processes at universities are set up so that you're right. Either your first author or your last author. In a lot of places, if you're a middle author, it doesn't count. It's either the first or last author position. And so that does incline people to be self-centered with regard to what they're doing. And hoard, I've experienced it myself. people hoarding data, afraid that you're going to somehow get their data and discover something that they didn't discover. And I think previously we talked about this idea of when things are when studies are negative, they don't find the answer that you hope that they would find. And I have like the biggest study that I've done that I haven't been able to get published because of that. This long study where we looked at mice and we used medications to try to change their arterial structure, and ta-da, it didn't do what I was hoping it would do. And that's actually important because other people have gone on to do the same thing and wasted their time and energy and all that. If we did have, as you sort of allude, the journal of I was wrong, or we didn't find what we hoped to, or whatever it may be, then that would, how many dollars of funding and time and all that sort of stuff would we save? But that is absolutely, people aren't considering the second, third order effects of the system.
Yeah,
considering
where I would disagree with you is I don't believe the NIH has been quick at all to grapple with this program.
I didn't say they were quick. I just said they're starting.
They're being very bureaucratic about it. They're supporting the old way of doing things and throwing crumbs to those of us who say, hey, you need to have common data elements. You need to have data sharing plans. You need to have those kinds of things, and you need to enforce them. And the fact of the matter is they do all that, but then they don't enforce what they say they're going to do. I mean, they are prisoners to an old system. And what's really sad about it, Tom, is when you really do have a breakthrough, and there have been countless studies done on this, when you really do have a breakthrough, because of peer-reviewed journalism, the way we pass out lessons learned in medicine, it takes 16 years from the breakthrough till it's generally accepted in medicine. It takes that long to permeate the system. That's really kind of sad. That's really kind of sad, which causes people to have to, when they have a problem, to try to find out who's doing the most, innovative and cutting edge research in a particular area and try to go there to find out if the problem that your doctor thinks needs to be handled this way. Quite frankly, it was shown years ago that the best way to do it is this way. Those are the kinds of things that's a second and third order effect of a system that I believe is antiquated and needs to be changed. And I don't really believe it would be that hard to change it.
Yeah. Your optimism on that note may be greater than mine. It's sad to say, but anyway, let's hope that can be changed. With regard to this, we've talked about the medical research as evidence or an example of second and third order effects, and you talked about sending folks downrange and extending and that in Iraq. And I talked a little bit about pre-mortem. If you could crystallize a system, heuristic, whatever you want to call it, of how you go about thinking about second and third order effects, do you have some sort of systematic process that you go through when looking at a major decision on, okay, here's what I think should happen now? How do you consider those second and third order effects?
Well, I think a lot of people do it in everyday life. When you have to make a personal decision of some type, when you have to make those very difficult decisions, I think what a lot of people do, and I found it very, very helpful, is to find some quiet time, sit down, list the decision I have to make, and then list the pluses and minuses of making that decision one way or another. And that's what you've got to get the people that are working for you to do, not just come blowing into your office telling you, the organizations you're working with, telling you, hey, this is the decision you need to make, and you're the only one who can make it. Have them come into your office and say, hey, this is the decision we recommend you make. However, you need to understand there's going to be some positives to making this decision, but there's also going to be some negatives. We believe this is the right decision, but how can we mitigate those negatives? What good units did downrange is when they were given those instructions that they were going to have to stand next for 4 months, I learned from commanders who went before me who would send an ADC back to the United States right away, back to the home base, gather the families, explain the situation that they were in, provide them the help that they needed, and work with the companies who they'd signed up for a cruise that was non-refundable to explain that, here we have somebody who is serving their nation. Can you help them with airplane ticket vouchers, cruise vouchers, return their money, whatever it might be. You work those things. You just didn't let them dangle out there and not help people. That's what really good learning organizations do. They go into a problem set understanding that, hey, there may be a solution to this, but that solution is going to kick off some negative things. And what do I do to go ahead and mitigate those negative consequences of the decision I'm about to make?
As I've thought about second, third order effects, and you've talked about it in a sort of personal manner, right? Like as we're going about daily life, or we're in a position of leadership, we make these decisions. And it seems, in my observation and thinking about it, And the example that I use in the book with regard to this, it seems like large amorphous organizations, governments, honestly, are the most susceptible to not considering second and third order effects, it seems to me. And so when I look at a lot of things in the world and historically, it seems like it's that. It's some representative of some group who pushes a decision and action or whatever and doesn't necessarily think about the ripple effects basically of this. And the example that I use in the book is Pearl Harbor. And so, you know this, but I'll just sort of say a little bit of it with regard, so the listeners may have an idea. But as Japan was looking to expand their control in the Western Pacific, they needed oil, gasoline, so forth. And the United States, not involved in World War II at that point, put an embargo on so that they couldn't get any resources from us in hopes that they would quit their expansion. And Japan said, well, here's what we'll do. We'll attack the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, and then the U.S. will be afraid, they won't be able to defend, and they will acquiesce to our demands for oil and gas and so forth and so on, and we can keep expanding our empire across Southeast Asia and what have you. And so they attacked a sleeping giant, as it were, and didn't think about the second and third order effects or possibilities that maybe we wouldn't be acquiescing to their demands for fuel and so on. And the second order effect was that we entered the war at that point, that they got a target, and eventually we created an atomic bomb and we did all those things. And I wonder just historically how that would have panned out if somebody said, hey, maybe they won't just bow to our desire for oil and gas, how that might have changed history. Anyway, but that's the example that I use in the book with regard to second and third order effects, and as an example of an organization, a government, not necessarily thinking through those things.
It's a great example. And history is replete with examples like that of people not thinking through the second and third order effects. You might argue that what you see going on in the Ukraine today is a good example of somebody not thinking through the second and third order effects and the impact that has had on bringing an alliance closer together. And we saw that yesterday in the prisoner exchange, in my opinion. I think it was said very, very eloquently and correct, the power of alliances, that we were able to get back some Americans. And quite frankly, it was our allies who basically provided what was necessary in order to get those folks back. It wasn't us. We worked the diplomacy end of it and pulling together the alliance to say that this is how we get these Americans back, and we need your help in doing it.
Yeah. Well, General, that's all the major questions. I have one left for you, and that is just, do you have any sort of parting wisdom for our listeners with regard to think about second and third order effects in their daily lives, in their leadership roles?
Yeah, I think sometimes when you start discussing a subject like this, and people think that there's a tendency of some leaders to get too far down into the weeds, and they use that in a way to say, well, that's really not my responsibility I've got to make the best decision to solve the immediate problem at hand, and it's going to be somebody else's responsibility to handle the chaff created by the explosion I'm about ready to make. They tend to say, well, a leader who does that, who requires that, is really getting too far down into the weeds. I don't believe that's the case. I believe it's just good leadership in understanding the decisions you make, the total impact it's going to have on people. And when you see it's going to cause negative impact, doing everything you possibly can to mitigate that. That doesn't mean you're always going to be you're not going to be able to stop the tears when families find out that mom or dad isn't coming home for another 4 months, that they've been gone for 12, and now they're going to be gone for 16. They're going to be in harm's way for another 4 months, and bad things that could happen, and we're not going to Disneyland. There's still going to be tears. There's still going to be anxiousness. But the fact of the matter is, you can do things to help mitigate that and make it easier for people. And more importantly, you're really showing them that you care. You understand that the decision you made was the best for the mission you had. Quite frankly, they may have a different mission. And yours is taking precedence at this particular point in time. But by showing them, taking the time to mitigate those second and third order effects because you understand what they are. And you're not always going to get them all, but you understand what they are. Goes a long way in creating what I believe are learning organizations that perform at a much higher level than organizations that don't apply that kind of risk mitigation.
I appreciate that. And this idea of learning organizations and the importance of that. And I want to stay on the topic. I really would like to dive into this idea of the growth mindset and learning organizations and how important it is to embrace failure as an opportunity for growth and improvement. Maybe sometime down the road I can have you back on and we can talk about that because that's a whole domain in and of itself. This idea of growth mindset and things that so many of us who are in leadership historically, a lot of times that is people have been achievers. They've done well in a number of different areas. And so they're selected because of competence with regard to what they do, not necessarily with regard to their ability to lead. And because of that history that they have, a lot of times folks will have a fixed mindset and failure is a knock on them. And so then they steer clear of growth mindset. But this idea of growth mindset and so forth, I think is so important. And again, maybe sometime down the road I can, convince you to come back and we can talk about that.
I look forward to it.
All right, General. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the Science of Leadership and talking with me about the second and third order effects and how that's important for folks in leadership positions and for the organizations and the groups that we lead. And as always, I really appreciate your service to our nation. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you for what you're doing. I think we can only become better as a society if we think about these things. And leadership is something we all crave, particularly good leadership. So thank you for adding to the number of people that become good leaders, not just leaders.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion has inspired you and given you valuable insights to help you become a better leader. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.